So let's talk about the role of PowerShell and CLI and how you can get it for yourself to run Azure administration commands from your desktop. Now, if you've never heard of PowerShell before, or even if you have, you would know that PowerShell is a command line utility that has been shipped and included with Windows for at least around 10 years now. So if you go into the latest of Windows 10 and you start to the Windows command and start typing PowerShell, you should see a PowerShell app that has already installed in your Windows machine. I should warn you, though, that the chances are that you have an older version of PowerShell, and so maybe one of the first things you want to do is get the latest version. The latest version of PowerShell is called PowerShell 7, and it is a cross-platform version of PowerShell, so no matter what operating system you have, you can find a PowerShell 7 that you can install and run PowerShell from your desktop. Now, the old versions of PowerShell, PowerShell 5 and before, were Windows specific. Now, there's a second scripting language we saw in the Azure Cloud Shell, but it's also available from your desktop called Bash CLI. And if you have a Linux system, you should be well familiar with the Bash command line. And so the Azure CLI is the command line interface that supports Bash scripting. Now, Azure CLI is also cross-platform, so if you want to use the CLI commands in Windows, you can download the CLI client for that. So you have your choice between PowerShell and CLI. There are no really strong differences between PowerShell and CLI if you are just starting out and you don't know which one to choose. PowerShell is known as an object-oriented language, and so maybe there's some more programmatic aspects. If you're a programmer and you want to write some very complex scripts, PowerShell might be stronger for that. But I've seen PowerShell users who start using CLI and fall in love with CLI, and I've seen CLI users who start using PowerShell and start appreciating the benefits of that. So it really is a specific preference. I can't really recommend one or the other. So if you have PowerShell or you have CLI or you have Bash, you're going to need the Azure specific modules. Now, as I mentioned in a previous video, you also don't have to install a command line PowerShell or CLI on your desktop. You can use the Azure Cloud Shell. And I previously told you it's on the top line of your portal with the greater than sign and underscore. It'll take you to a PowerShell or a CLI within the browser, and you can run your Azure PowerShell commands like get-azvm right within the browser. You don't even have to log in. It will use your account that you're already logged in as. And there's a CLI version. Actually, the great thing about PowerShell in the Cloud Shell is that the CLI commands work. And so PowerShell inside of Cloud Shell is actually cross-platform. It supports both languages. And so that's AZ-VM list is a CLI command, and I'm running in PowerShell and it works. So let's talk specifically about PowerShell. Now, a couple of years ago, a year ago, Microsoft switched the module. It used to be called Azure RM, and you might still see references here and there, whether it's inside this course or elsewhere on the web, to the Azure RM module. And now the PowerShell module is called AZ. So you really must switch over. You can't be expecting to be run old Azure RM module commands forever, okay? You cannot have both installed at the same time. So you can't install PowerShell, have the Azure RM modules, and the AZ modules. You have to choose. Now, there is a way of having two versions of PowerShell installed. So if you want PowerShell 5 and PowerShell 7 installed, you can install both. And then the PowerShell 5 can be using the old Azure RM modules, and PowerShell 7 can be using the new AZ modules. These are, as at the time of recording, some of the more recent versions of PowerShell. And of course, they come out with dot releases. I think PowerShell is at 6.4 and PowerShell 7 is 7.1. You know, over the months, they install new ones. So PowerShell 7 is the latest. That is the one that I recommend. Now, once you've got PowerShell installed, you're going to want to install the AZ module. It's install-module -name AZ. Now, you want them to be able to update the module, so allow clobber parameter allows you to overwrite. And if there's some errors and things are giving conflicts, you might have to force it. There is no update command. You really just have to reinstall the module on top of the old module. When you're running PowerShell in your own local machine, then you're going to have to connect to your Azure account in order to do anything. So there's a login process that doesn't happen within Cloud Shell. really the decision for you is whether you're going to want your scripting to be running on your local machine or whether you're okay using the Cloud Shell. Like you can upload your scripts, you can store them in your Cloud Shell account, but some people are going to have that preference that they're going to want their scripts local, whether they use them within a source control, GitHub, whatever, but you want your scripts local, you're going to need a local version of PowerShell or CLI. So you're going to have an assignment after this. So I'm going to ask you to go and download the latest 7.0 release of PowerShell. The link to the download is in the resources of this video. Go and get the latest PowerShell. At the time of recording is 7.1. Maybe by this time it's 7.2, but whatever the latest version is, go and download it. Here is the URL to the, and I'll attach this URL to the video as well, GitHub. And you're going to want to install PowerShell, run PowerShell in administrator mode. Okay, so you run PowerShell, right click, run as administrator, and then you're going to want to install the Azure AZ module. It's going to go and download and install. So this is your assignment. I want you to pause the video after this video, go and get PowerShell 7, download it, install it, whatever the operating system is that you're running on, and get the AZ module and use that command, install module, name AZ, allow clobber, and when you come to the next video, you're going to have Azure PowerShell module installed.